Okay, we are looking at Genesis 37. The curriculum has listed the verses to be 5 through 8. I would go through 11, 5 through 11, and 18 through 28. This, of course, is a very well known passage regarding Joseph and his brothers and the jealousy and the envy. And so, envy and jealousy is basically a major theme here. I've kind of put it in this succinct statement that jealousy unchecked leads to murderous hatred. And we certainly see that in this passage. A good verse to share as you begin the lesson is Proverbs 14:30. Jealousy is rottenness to the bones. And so when these things aren't dealt with in our heart, then they'll lead to terrible actions as we see in this passage. Now, Joseph's brothers already hate him. You might want to ask why, and that will take your class into the first couple verses of this chapter, verses 1 through 4. Jacob obviously loved Joseph more. Joseph was his favorite, no doubt, because he was the firstborn of Rachel, his favorite wife. I would call her his soulmate, if you will. And so Joseph is given this special coat. It's been commonly referred to as a coat of many colors. The Hebrew does not really indicate that was really exactly what the coat was. It literally means to be long sleeved. It could have had various colors on it. It may have just been that it's very ornate, and we see the same word used in 2 Samuel 13:18, where the robe there indicates royalty. 2 Samuel 13:18, now she was wearing a long robe with sleeves, for thus were the virgin daughters of the king dressed. So his servant put her out and bolted the door after her. So when you think of the importance of sons and inheritance and all that, I mean, Joseph is the 11th son, but he's the firstborn of Rachel. So I think Jacob's kind of making a statement here about how he views Joseph. They get that, and they are hating him for it. And then as they're in the fields taking care of the flocks, the scripture doesn't tell us what exactly they were doing that was wrong, but Joseph reports them to his dad, and of course he'll probably have a lot of debate on if that was wrong of him. Some actually really tear Joseph up for this, call him a tattletale, and he's arrogant about his dreams. Again, you got to interpret things based on the overall context of Scripture. Joseph is never represented as a godless or immature fleshly person. His brothers, on the other hand, are, and and Esau, Jacob's brother, obviously is. So even in the law, when the law came about, it would be wrong to hold back an unjust thing that you witness. Leviticus 5:1. If anyone sins in that he hears a public adjuration to testify, and though he is a witness, whether he has seen or come to know the matter, yet he does not speak, he shall bear his iniquity. So maybe just to put it in your class, your students' lives, would it be right for them to see obvious wrongdoing going on in their place of work that's hurting their employer, and for them not to speak about it, not to report it? Would that be a godly thing to do? I wouldn't think so. Um, so they hate him even more because of that. And then the ultimate motivation that pushes them over the top are these dreams. So why did the dream fuel their hatred? They certainly understood its meaning. That's clear in the text. They may have done it, talked about it sarcastically or mockingly, as if, who do you think you are? But deep down, I think they understood that maybe Joseph was more loved by God, not just by Jacob, because God is revealing truth to him. And in time, they would certainly come to understand that, but I think they already understood it. Jacob did. That's clear in the text once you get to the second dream. What is ironic and foreshadowing, maybe even prophetic, even though nobody would have seen it then, is that the actual dream where the sheaves are bowing down to Joseph foreshadows the ultimate circumstances of which his brothers would bow down to him, because it's after the famine. And Joseph, of course, in Egypt is securing all this grain through the dream interpretations and the 7 years of plenty and the 7 years of famine. And so, what is it that they have to come to Joseph to get? They have to get grain. And when they finally discover he's alive and so forth, Genesis 41:49, Joseph stored up grain in great abundance like the sand of the sea until he ceased to measure it, for it could not be measured. And then chapter 41, verse 57, moreover, all the earth came to Egypt to Joseph to buy grain because the famine was severe over all the earth. And Joseph, of course, was second in command under Pharaoh. And so they would come and bow before him, as scripture tells us later on. As the brothers see him coming, as they're out now in Dothan, and Joseph is coming to them again to probably to report for his dad, see how they're doing. They say that in chapter 37, verse 19 and 20, they said to one another, "Here comes this dreamer. Now then, come and let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits, and we will say, a wild beast devoured him. Then let us see what will become of his dreams." So they are really being sarcastic here. And I think they did understand the prophetic nature on some level of his dreams. So I think they're really challenging that and basically trying to prevent from happening what God has already been revealing. And I think that's an important application to make through this lesson, is that regardless of man's evil intent and regardless of his actions, man is not going to keep God's plan from taking place. Even our own sin is not going to, and failures are not going to keep God from doing the plan he has for us. He can get past that, obviously, if we're repentant and get back right with him. So all this fuels their animosity, their jealousy. So the opportunity comes to get rid of Joseph, and they enact their murderous plan, verses 18 through 20. And Reuben then steps in and suggests the plan B. And of course, another good discussion question is what motivated Reuben to do this. It's possible that he didn't hate Joseph as much as the other brothers. But secondly, he's the eldest, so he's going to be held accountable. He's going to be the one responsible for what happens to Joseph. And then also, he's already on the out with Jacob because of his sin back in chapter 37, verses 26 through 28, where he goes into his father's concubine. So he needs to get back into Jacob's good graces. He's the eldest, he doesn't want to sacrifice the privileges of that. So all of these things are no doubt working in his heart to deliver Joseph from death. Of course, God providentially uses all these things to keep Joseph alive. And because Reuben, no doubt, they weren't taking care of sheep, so Reuben evidently is not there when they actually decide to sell Joseph to the Ishmaelites. So Reuben comes back and discovers Joseph no longer in the pit, and then of course they've dipped his coat. They've torn it up and dipped his coat in the blood of goats, which is ironic because Jacob deceived his father with goats' hair, and now he's being deceived by goats. His sons are being deceived by goat's blood, or are deceiving, I should say, deceiving him by goat's blood. Anyways, so Reuben probably eventually finds out early on that they didn't kill him, but Jacob doesn't. So they actually are so cold-hearted, they allow Jacob to believe that Joseph is dead for at least 15 to 20 years. It's going to be before Jacob finds out that Joseph is alive. And I'm not going to walk through that other than just think about the 7 years of famine, the 7 years of plenty have to go by, or at least mostly go by before before Jacob actually discovers Joseph is alive. And then the last verse, verse 36, is meanwhile, this band of, or the Ishmaelites, excuse me, let me get over here and just double check the verse. Meanwhile, the Midianites, also called the Ishmaelites in this passage, sold him in Egypt. So that little statement is not only setting us up for the future, but again, it just demonstrates God's providence. I mean, they go to Egypt, and it's in Egypt that they multiply greatly. Of course, it's in Egypt that Joseph is able to deliver them through things that happen to him. So again, we see God working through providential circumstances, even evil circumstances, which is what Joseph tells them in chapter 50, verse 21, verse 20. As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring about that many people should be kept alive as they are today. Those many people not only being a reference to everybody that he helped through the famine survive, but ultimately help his brothers to survive, which become the many people of the nation of Israel. So just to close this video, a couple quick applications to make. Don't let envy, jealousy make you bitter. And then secondly, don't allow the hate of others to harden you, which Joseph didn't. As you go on in the story and you get to chapter 50 and even the chapters before that, we see Joseph having a forgiving spirit and not taking revenge against his brothers. So that's an important application. And then, as I've already stated, this idea of trusting God, no matter what happens, his plan is being carried out, and we can trust him with the negative circumstances that take place. Well, there's a lot in this passage, and I didn't say everything that could be said. I never do, but I even am now thinking about some things I meant to say and didn't. But I hope that you will just take a lot of time with this passage. Have a great lesson Sunday, and we'll see you on Sunday.